In this video, we're going to talk about the alternation of generations in plants, and this is dealing with sexual reproduction. So before we get too far into talking about the alternation of generations, let's do a quick review of the terms haploid and diploid. And haploid we can abbreviate as 1N, whereas diploid is 2N. And the N in these abbreviations refers to the number of the sets of chromosomes. And remember that these chromosomes are located in the nucleus of a eukaryotic cell. These are terms that you probably learned about when you learned about the concepts of mitosis and meiosis. So let's start by talking about the diploid condition. So in cells that are diploid in the nucleus, there are going to be paired or two sets of chromosomes. So we can say that there are two sets of chromosomes. We can say that there are paired chromosomes. And the chromosomes in the pair are known as homologous chromosomes. So this would be a pair of homologous chromosomes. And the reason why we have these homologous chromosomes is because of sexual reproduction. So in a diploid organism, one set of chromosomes comes from the male gamete, which would be something like the sperm. And the other set comes from the female gamete, which would be the egg, also oftentimes called the ova or ovum. So ovum is singular, ova is plural. And remember that these homologous chromosomes are similar, but not identical. If you think back to when you learned about Mendelian genetics and you learned about alleles, which are these different kind of variations of the same gene, and you learned about the conditions known as homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, and heterozygous, those alleles are located on these homologous chromosomes. So one chromosome might have the dominant allele for a gene, the other one might have a recessive allele for the gene. To give you an example of an organism made up of diploid cells, we could say humans. So the majority of the cells in our bodies are diploid. The only exceptions are the gametes, or the eggs and the sperm, that you make in order to engage in sexual reproduction. So now let's talk about the haploid condition. So in a haploid cell, there's only one set of chromosomes in the cell's nucleus. So this means that these cells do not have paired chromosomes and they don't have homologous chromosomes. So you would only have one set of chromosomes in the cell's nucleus. So some examples of haploid cells include gametes, so sperm and eggs. And gametes exist not only in humans, but also in plants. So let's also do a quick review of mitosis. And we're not going to focus on the kind of the nitty-gritty details of mitosis, but we're just going to look at the overall process of what goes in and what comes out. So during mitosis, you have a parent cell. And I'm going to start by drawing a diploid parent cell. And remember, diploid just means that there are two sets or pairs of chromosomes. Now, whatever the parent cell has, the daughter cells are going to end up with the same combination. So this parent cell is going to go through the steps of mitosis, and it's ultimately going to form two daughter cells that are genetically identical to each other and genetically identical to the parent cell. So if the parent cell starts out diploid or 2N, the daughter cells are also going to be diploid or 2N. Now, mitosis can also occur in a haploid cell. So if the parent cell is haploid or 1N, then the daughter cells produced by mitosis are also going to be haploid. So we still end up with two daughter cells that are genetically identical. And they are genetically identical to each other and to the parent cell. So the main thing to keep in mind here is that if the parent cell is diploid, the daughter cells are also going to be diploid. If the parent cell is haploid, the daughter cells are also going to be haploid. So now let's do a quick comparison between mitosis and meiosis. And once again, we're not going to go over the nitty-gritty, kind of all the intermediate steps. We're just going to look at the overall input and output of these processes. So as we mentioned on the previous slide with mitosis, if the parent cell is diploid, the daughter cells will also be diploid. If the parent cell is haploid, the daughter cells will also be haploid. In meiosis, this is different. In meiosis, the parent cell is always diploid. And then in meiosis, there are actually two rounds of cell division. So we ultimately end up with 4 daughter cells. And these daughter cells are genetically different from each other and genetically different from the parent cell. These daughter cells are also all haploid, or 1N. So during meiosis, you go from a diploid cell to a haploid cell. So first let's talk about sexual reproduction in humans, because you might be somewhat familiar with this. In humans, we do not have an alternation of generations. What this means is that the dominant stage of a human's life cycle is a multicellular diploid stage. This means that the majority of our lives, we are multicellular organisms, and the majority of our cells are diploid. We do have some specialized cells in our body that can go through meiosis to form unicellular haploid gametes. But these gametes are not their own kind of stage of our life, they're just cells within our body. Remember that gametes in males, we're talking about sperm. And in females, we're talking about eggs or ova. Now in plants, they do have this alternation of generations. And so they have a part of their life cycle where they are diploid and multicellular, and a part of their life cycle where they are haploid but still multicellular. So this is really the key difference, is this haploid multicellular stage in plants that we don't have in humans. In humans, the haploid cells are they're unicellular and they're not their own organism, they're just the reproductive cells. Notice, however, that the haploid multicellular generation in plants is known as the gametophyte generation. So that word should make you think of gametes, which are haploid. So that might help you remember which generation is haploid. The gametophyte generation is haploid, just like gametes in humans are haploid. So let's start by talking about the sporophyte generation in plants. So the sporophyte generation on our picture here is down here. Remember that the sporophyte is diploid, which you can see this whole green area is showing the diploid structures. And it is also multicellular. So each of the cells in the sporophyte is diploid. The cells in the sporophyte can go through meiosis. And remember that during meiosis, the ploidy of the cells change. So the diploid cells are going to go through meiosis to produce haploid cells. And those haploid cells are going to be known as spores. And these spores are unicellular. And as you can see, this entire yellow area here is showing you the haploid structures. If those spores find a suitable habitat, they can germinate. And germinate just means that they can go through mitosis. Remember that during mitosis, whatever the parent cell is, the daughter cells are going to have the same genetic makeup and the same ploidy. So in this case, you have a haploid spore producing haploid daughter cells that ultimately make up this multicellular haploid gametophyte. So remember that when the sporophyte went through meiosis, it went from diploid to haploid. And it went from multicellular to unicellular. And then during germination, mitosis occurred, so the cells stayed haploid, but went from being a unicellular spore to a multicellular structure known as a gametophyte. On the previous slide, we left off talking about the gametophyte, which is a multicellular structure with haploid cells. Now in humans, for us to create haploid gametes, we have to go through meiosis, and that's because most of our cells are diploid and gametes have to be haploid. However, in plants, they can produce gametes through mitosis. Because remember, during mitosis, whatever ploidy the parent cell is, the daughter cells are going to have that same ploidy. So these gametes are going to be unicellular and haploid. And they were produced by mitosis instead of meiosis, which is what you may be more familiar with in humans. And remember that the gametes are going to be things like eggs and sperm. And this diagram is showing you a gamete that is produced by this gametophyte and then a gamete produced by a separate gametophyte from a different organism coming together. And I kind of passed over this structure here, the gametangia, and we'll talk about these in more detail when we talk about the specifics of alternation of generations in certain plants. On the previous couple of slides, we covered what happens with a sporophyte going through these stages of the alternation of generations. So let's pick up where we left off on the last slide with the gametes coming together. So the gametes can fuse, and fuse is just another word for fertilization. And this is where a female gamete and a male gamete are going to come together. So we have these 1N gametes. So remember they are 1N or haploid. And they each have their own kind of single set of chromosomes. And when they fuse together, it's going to form a diploid cell that has a combination or two sets from those two gametes from their chromosomes coming together, and now they're paired up in these homologous chromosomes. And this structure is known as a zygote. So we went from two gametes to a zygote, which we can see on this picture right here. And the zygote is going to be unicellular and diploid. The diploid zygote is then going to go through mitosis. And because it starts out diploid, all of the cells that it produces are also going to be diploid. And it's going to end up forming the multicellular structure known as a sporophyte. Remember that all of the cells in the sporophyte are diploid. So you can see that we ended up back where we started with a multicellular diploid sporophyte, and then the cycle can restart. And just a reminder, the area up here in yellow is looking at the gametophyte generation of the alternation of generations. And during this generation, all of the cells are haploid. The green, or the bottom part of this diagram, is looking at the sporophyte generation. where all the cells are diploid, or 2N. Okay, so let's put this all together on one slide to summarize what we talked about on the previous slides. So first of all, we have the sporophyte, which is multicellular and has diploid cells. Cells in the sporophyte go through meiosis, in which the ploidy decreases. So diploid cells produce haploid cells. And these haploid cells are known as spores. And so these spores are unicellular and haploid. If these spores find a place to germinate, they go through mitosis. And because the spores are haploid, they produce other haploid cells. So as they go through mitosis, they form a gametophyte, which is multicellular, and all the cells are haploid. Those cells can then go through mitosis, and because they are haploid, they produce other haploid cells that are called gametes. And gametes are going to be things like egg and sperm. Gametes from either the same plant or different plants can fuse in a process known as fertilization. So during fertilization, you have these haploid single-celled structures that are coming together to form still a single cell, but now it is diploid. So during fertilization, you can take 1N plus 1N and make a structure that is diploid. So the zygote is going to be unicellular and diploid. It can then go through mitosis. And so the cells that are diploid are going to produce more diploid cells. And those diploid cells are going to form a sporophyte, which is multicellular, and all the cells are diploid. And this cycle continues on and on and on.